Captain Ethan Steele had always considered himself a man of action. His life had been spent traveling the stars, exploring distant planets and surviving in the most dangerous conditions imaginable. He had faced hostile environments, alien species, and even near-death situations, but none of it had prepared him for what lay ahead on the savage world he now found himself stranded on. His ship had malfunctioned during a routine scan of the planet's atmosphere, sending him spiraling down to the surface. Now stuck on a wild, untamed planet far from any civilization, Ethan's survival instincts kicked in. He had no choice but to rely on his training, hunting for food, avoiding dangerous predators, and trying to figure out how to repair his ship with limited resources. Days turned into weeks, and still Ethan had made little progress in fixing the ship. The planet was harsh and unforgiving, its wilderness filled with terrifying creatures and unpredictable weather. Despite his years of experience, he was beginning to feel the weight of isolation. He missed human contact, the simple conversations, the laughter, the comfort of knowing he wasn't alone. It was on one of these lonely days, while wandering through the dense jungle, that he encountered the village. He had been following a trail of smoke, hoping it would lead him to a source of food or perhaps a safe place to rest. Instead, it led him to a tribe of people, tall, muscular, and clearly not afraid of the dangers of the planet. They were the Savrians, a fierce tribe that had lived on this world for generations, and they were led by a powerful chief named Korak. Ethan had been cautious at first, observing from a distance. He didn't want to make any sudden moves that could get him killed. However, the longer he watched, the more curious he became about their way of life. These people were survivors just like him. They lived off the land, respected its power, and fought to maintain their place in the world. But it wasn't the chief or the warriors who caught Ethan's attention. It was the chief's wife, Amara. Amara was unlike any woman Ethan had ever seen. She was strong yet graceful, with eyes that held a quiet wisdom. She wasn't just the chief's wife. She was a warrior in her own right, commanding respect from those around her. She carried herself with an air of authority, but there was something in her demeanor, something soft, that made Ethan pause. She seemed different from the others, as if she didn't belong in the world of constant fighting and survival. For reasons Ethan couldn't fully explain, he felt drawn to her. It wasn't just physical attraction, though that was certainly part of it. There was something deeper, something he couldn't put into words, that made him wonder what it would be like to sit down with her and talk, to share a moment of peace in this chaotic world. Ethan had spent weeks alone, struggling to repair his ship, hunting for food, and fending off wild creatures. He had tried to reach out to the Savrians in his own way, hoping they would notice him and offer assistance, but they didn't seem to care for outsiders. They had their own rules, their own ways of living, and they weren't interested in helping a stranded human. But Amara was different. She wasn't like the others. It was one evening as the sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky with streaks of orange and purple, that Ethan made his decision. He would approach her. It was risky, he knew that, but the loneliness was eating at him. He needed to talk to someone, to have a conversation that didn't revolve around survival. He needed connection. In the dead of night, when the village had settled into its usual quiet, Ethan snuck toward the chief's hut. He had a plan in mind, but it was a desperate one. He had no idea what kind of reaction he would get, but he couldn't take the solitude any longer. He slipped into the shadows and made his way toward Amara's dwelling. He didn't know how he was going to explain himself, how he was going to talk his way out of this situation, but he didn't care. He had to do something or he was going to lose his mind. What happened next was beyond his expectations. Amara was sitting outside her hut, staring up at the stars. She seemed calm, serene, as though she were waiting for something. Ethan took a deep breath, stepped into the clearing, and cleared his throat. "I didn't expect you to be here," he said, his voice gruff, betraying his nerves. Amara turned her head toward him, her gaze piercing in the dim light. There was no fear in her eyes, only curiosity. "You're brave coming here alone," she said softly. "Or perhaps foolish." Ethan couldn't help but chuckle. "A little bit of both, I suppose." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The sounds of the jungle filled the air around them, the rustling of leaves, the distant howls of creatures, the chirping of insects. Ethan couldn't remember the last time he had felt so alive, so connected to the world around him. "I'm Captain Ethan Steele," he said, breaking the silence. I'm stranded here. My ship crashed and I've been trying to survive. I didn't mean to intrude, but I need help. I thought maybe you could help me. Amara raised an eyebrow, her lips curling into a slight smile. Help you? She repeated. Why should I help you? You are an outsider, a human. Ethan nodded, his expression serious. I know I'm an outsider, but I'm not asking for charity. I just need some guidance. I'm not like your people, but I'm trying to survive. Maybe we can help each other. For a moment, there was silence again. Then Amara spoke, her voice low but with a hint of amusement. You don't know much about our people, do you, Captain Steele? Ethan shook his head. No, I don't, but I'm willing to learn. Amara's gaze softened, and for the first time since he had met her, Ethan saw a flicker of something. Maybe empathy, maybe understanding. Then perhaps we can talk, she said. But first you must prove yourself. The Savrians do not trust easily. I'll do whatever it takes, Ethan said, feeling a surge of determination. He didn't know what was going to happen, but he knew one thing for sure. This conversation was the first step toward something new. And as they sat together, talking long into the night, something unexpected began to stir between them. It wasn't just the conversation that brought them closer. It was the shared loneliness, the understanding that they were both outsiders in a world that had no place for them. By the time the night had ended, Ethan realized something he hadn't expected. He hadn't just found a way to survive. He had found a connection, one he hadn't even known he needed. And Amara, she hadn't just found a captive. She had found someone who saw her as more than just the chief's wife. She had found someone who could truly understand her. As the days passed, Ethan and Amara spent more and more time together. What had started as a desperate plea for help had turned into something neither of them had anticipated. The loneliness that Ethan had felt since crashing on this harsh planet began to fade. The more he spoke with Amara, the more he realized how deeply connected they had become. Despite their vastly different worlds, they shared a common bond of survival, of being outcast in a place that didn't seem to want them. Amara had grown up in the Savrian tribe, living under the strict rule of her husband, Chief Korak. To the outside world, she was the perfect wife, a strong woman, revered and respected. But deep down, she had always longed for freedom. Her marriage to Korak was more of a political arrangement than a union of love. Korak was powerful, and through their marriage, Amara had gained influence, but at the cost of her own desires and dreams. Ethan's presence in her life gave her a glimpse of something she had longed for, a chance to choose her own path. The more they talked, the more Amara realized that she didn't want to return to her old life with Korak. She had been trapped for too long in a world that only valued her strength, but never her voice. With Ethan, for the first time in years, she felt like she was seen for who she truly was, but the peace they had found was fragile. The Savrians were not a forgiving people, and Chief Korak was not a man who would easily accept his wife's disappearance. Every night, Ethan and Amara moved deeper into the jungle, hiding from the relentless search parties Korak had sent out. The jungle, dense and full of dangers, was their only refuge, but even it couldn't protect them forever. Ethan knew that time was running out. He had been able to hide his ship's crash site from the Savrians, but the longer they stayed in the jungle, the closer Korak's warriors would get. The chief's men were relentless, and Ethan had learned that they would stop at nothing to find Amara and bring her back. One evening, as they sat by a fire, Amara spoke with a heavy heart. Korak will never stop searching for me, Ethan. He is a powerful man, and he will send his warriors until they find us. Ethan's jaw tightened. I know, but we can't keep running forever. I need to fix my ship, and the only way to do that is to get to the tools I left near the crash site. But the longer we stay here, the more dangerous it gets. Amara nodded. She understood. They both knew that they couldn't outrun the chief and his men forever. They needed to find a way to fight back, to regain control of their lives. I've been thinking, Amara said after a pause. There is a place deep in the jungle, an ancient temple hidden from the rest of the tribe. The Savrians don't go there. It is a sacred place where our ancestors once gathered. Ethan raised an eyebrow. A temple? What does that have to do with us? Amara's eyes sparkled with determination. Inside the temple is an artifact, a powerful one. It was used in the past to protect our people from invaders, to shield them from harm. If we can get there, it could give us the protection we need. Ethan looked at her, a mix of doubt and hope in his eyes. Are you sure this artifact exists? I know it does, Amara said, her voice steady. It's not a myth. My father told me about it when I was a child. It's real. Ethan stood up, looking out into the dense jungle. The thought of facing Korak's warriors without any protection seemed impossible, but the idea of using the artifact to defend themselves gave him a flicker of hope. All right, he said, his voice firm. We'll go to the temple, but we need to move fast. If Korak's warriors find us before we get there— I know, Amara interrupted. But it's our only chance. Together they set out into the jungle, the weight of the journey pressing down on them. The path was treacherous, with thick underbrush and dangerous wildlife lurking around every corner. But they were determined. They had no other choice. The journey took them deeper into the jungle than they had ever been. As night fell, the jungle seemed to come alive with sounds. The chirping of insects, the distant howls of unknown creatures, the rustle of leaves in the wind. It was a world full of dangers, and Ethan knew they couldn't afford to make any mistakes. After several days of travel, they finally reached the ancient temple. It was unlike anything Ethan had ever seen. The massive stone structure was covered in vines, its surface worn by time but still standing strong. The air around it seemed heavy, charged with energy. Amara led Ethan inside, her steps slow but purposeful. She had been here before, but for Ethan it was a place of wonder and mystery. They made their way through the dark corridors of the temple, following the path Amara had memorized from her childhood. Finally, they reached the heart of the temple, a large chamber with an altar at its center. On the altar lay the artifact, a small stone that seemed to glow with an inner light. Amara approached the stone, her hands trembling slightly. "This is it," she whispered, her voice filled with awe. Ethan stood behind her, watching in silence as Amara picked up the artifact. The moment her fingers touched it, a wave of energy pulsed through the air and the room seemed to shift around them. The stone hummed, vibrating in Amara's hands as if it were alive. Suddenly, the sound of footsteps echoed in the temple. Ethan's heart skipped a beat. He turned to see a group of Savrian warriors emerging from the shadows, their weapons drawn. It was too late to run. They had been found. "Amara," one of the warriors shouted. "You cannot escape. Come with us and your life will be spared." Amara stepped forward, holding the artifact in her hands. "I will never return to him," she said, her voice strong, defiant. "I am free." Ethan quickly grabbed her arm, pulling her behind him as the warriors closed in. "We won't let you take her," he said, his voice steady but filled with urgency. He had no idea how this would end, but he couldn't let them take her. Not now. The warriors hesitated, their eyes flickering toward the artifact in Amara's hands. The energy it radiated seemed to intimidate them. They had heard of the artifact's power, but none had ever seen it activated. The leader of the warriors, a tall man with a scar across his face, stepped forward. "You are a fool, human. You cannot stop us." But as he took another step forward, something unexpected happened. The artifact in Amara's hands began to glow brighter, casting a blinding light throughout the room. The warriors recoiled, shielding their eyes, unable to bear the power emanating from the stone. Amara's voice rang out, steady and unwavering. "This is my choice, and I will not be controlled any longer." With that, the warriors backed away, fear in their eyes. They knew they couldn't fight the power of the artifact, and they had no desire to challenge it. The leader of the group scowled, but he knew they had lost. "This is not over," he warned before signaling his men to retreat. As they disappeared into the shadows, Ethan and Amara stood in the temple, both shaken but relieved. The artifact had worked. For now, they were safe. Ethan looked at Amara, his heart swelling with admiration. "You're incredible." Amara smiled, but there was something in her eyes that told Ethan this was only the beginning. The battle for freedom, for their future, was far from over. But with the power of the artifact and their growing bond, they knew they were ready to face whatever came next.